Hello everybody and welcome back to our next bag of our Tekno EB48 2.2 build. This time we're going to be working on bag F, which is going to continue our rear end build, specifically working on the rear hubs, camber links, and getting like the universals and stuff all mounted into the back of the vehicle. So as per usual, just like every other bag, we're going to go through, just make sure everything's organized, get any flashing off of things, get the bits we need. That way, when we start building, it all goes together nice and smooth. We're not searching for anything. It all just falls into place as it should. So you can see we've poked out our different camber link mounting position plates, I guess you could say, for the rear hubs. Of course, the rear hubs are out. Got all the plastics off of that, all the flashing. Now you can see we've got the bearings, drive shafts dropped out, the little ball ends, pins, nuts and such for the assembly end of things. Those, of course, being the pivot balls for the camber links. So we'll just spend this time, get everything set up nice and neat. All right, so now everything out of the bags, doing just some final steps there to get the rod ends all together. Now we can start our assembly. First thing we're gonna go ahead and do is get our bearings popped into our hubs. You'll have two different bearings there. You'll have a much larger bearing that'll sit on the inside, and then your outside bearing will just be a standard 8x16 flanged. Then we're gonna go ahead, get the camber link mounting plates put into the hubs themselves. Sometimes they need a little bit of help, but you can pop those in without too much trouble there. And in kit form, you'll have the 3 dots on top, 2 dots on the bottom, because this will build with the longest option out of the box. So we'll get our second hub all finished up there. And now you can see we're gonna go ahead and start mounting our universals, which is just as simple as sliding them into place. You'll get your actual hex put on the outdrive on the outside. And then the pins, you're gonna notice there's a little groove that's gonna be in them. That'll be where the set screw will actually bolt into. That way you don't have to worry about losing your pin. You can see right there, that groove sitting right in the middle of it. Again, that'll be where the set screw sits. Very similar to what something like the rear to center out drive would be, front to center out drive. You get it on that kind of flat spot so it holds a little bit nicer rather than having it be completely round, because you don't want to be losing pins as you're going around. After you do that, you can take your single large set screw. I guess you'll actually have 2 of them because you'll have 1 for each side, and you'll go ahead, get that tightened down again on that flat spot. You can just use the actual drive shaft itself at a 90°. That'll hold it enough to where you can get tight, or you can do it the probably theoretical, more proper way, which is getting the pin mounted, hex mounted, and then putting your 17mm wrench on the hex, tightening it that way. But we didn't do it that way because we're fighting the system here. So we're gonna go ahead, get our second one all finished up here, get that nut, or sorry, get the set screw onto the universal there. You can put Loctite on this. I've never had any issues where I've needed Loctite at all. I usually just get it nice and snug on there. But if you want to, just for good policy, just a little dab. You don't need anything super duper crazy, but just enough to where you don't have to worry about it potentially loosening up as you're going around the track. Now, this particular part of the footage, I did speed up. I got a bit ahead of myself. There's some bushings that go into the arms, and I mounted the rear ones the way you're technically supposed to mount the front ones, because I have built this car before, and I thought I was being slick and avoiding using the manual there, but I messed up. So you can see we're gonna go ahead, pop those bushings back out, get them remounted onto the proper side, which is on the outside. That way you can fit all of your shims into the actual hub so you can space it forward or backward, whatever you prefer. The kit should call for being a 2mm in the front and then a 1mm in the back, so a slightly longer overall wheelbase. And then what I was showing right there was just that you have 2 different options for your actual hub mounting height and the kit, and most of the time you're just going to use the upper hole, which will effectively lower the hub down, and that would be that -2 position that you do get with the new 2.2 out of the box. And of course, it is an option part that you can put on something like a 2.0 or 2.1, but in this case, it just comes with it. Now, a trick that I like to do for getting the hinge pins mounted is I'll put the nut on one end, slide it through, and I'll usually do the thinner one first because it's a little bit harder to manage because you have less material to grab onto. So I'll slide the hinge pin with the nut on it through the arm. I'll do the 1 mil, slide the hub on, and then it's a little bit tricky because you don't have a lot of room to work with, but I'll use the actual friction, kind of pinch the shim in between the hub and the arm, and then slowly kind of push it into the pin. That way you don't have to worry about it falling out. So, because you don't have a whole lot of working room to get in there. And again, it'll be the 2 mil on the front side of the car, so towards the inside of what will be the chassis, and then 1 mil on the back side, so effectively going for a longer wheelbase. And then you can see on the other side, we're getting that other nut mounted on to fully mount our rear hubs onto the car. And that'll just be 2 5.5 mil nuts. So I'll have a nut driver on my drill, and then I'll use my turnbuckle wrench, which is also a 5.5, to get the other side of the nut all mounted up. You don't have to do it that way. That's just the way that I do it. You can use a nut driver on both sides, pliers, whatever's easiest for you. That's just my personal preference. Now we're gonna go ahead and get the links all mounted up here, and you'll probably take a couple tries of just making sure you're threading it on the correct way. I like to use the threads themselves. I'll kind of get a general direction, which helps me to know which way to thread it. That way I don't spend a ton of time trying to figure out one way or the other. And then we can go ahead, once we get it a little bit threaded on there, we can work on getting the ball actually mounted into the link itself. Another thing that can sometimes be a pain, they do like to run away, but just take your time and get those mounted in. On the camber link itself, you'll notice that you'll have one side that is going to be completely smooth on like where the actual ball mounts. Then the other side will have kind of like a groove indentation. That is going to identify the wider opening side, so it'll be easier to pop the ball in on that side than to pop it in from the totally smooth side, which is the technical proper way to do it. And then the reason why I like to pop the ball in before I do all of my threading is because as you can see here, I use my 2 mil wrench to help just thread it on quicker, and I don't want to damage the plastic at all, wallow it out in any way, because I want to make sure that ball flows nice and smooth inside the link, because you don't want any of your suspension components binding while you're going around the track, because again, it can make for a poor driving vehicle. So you'll do a initial thread, pop the ball in, do a final thread. I don't personally do measuring just yet. My number one thing is to get them threaded on relatively far onto the link itself, but make it to where it's just even on both sides, because the measuring you can do at any point after this. I just like to make sure that if I have, for example, 5 threads showing on one side, I have 5 threads showing on the other side. In the grand scheme of things, if your total measurement is correct, that doesn't matter. That is a little bit more of an OCD thing, just making sure it's even on both sides. And it does make it to where, in theory, you have a wider range of option, because if you have it threaded in more on one side than the other, then technically as you're adjusting, that one side that's less threaded in could potentially just totally unthread. But now we can go ahead and get our second one set up. If you do have trouble getting these to thread on, something that you can do is on the very, very end of it, you can take a body reamer and just open it a little bit. That'll help get the thread started. I feel like in the case of the Tekno cars, they usually thread on fairly easily. They already kind of have that taper that you would get with the body reamer kind of on there, I guess you could say, from the factory. So I don't think you'll have too much trouble, but if you do, that is a trick you can use. So just like we did on the first one we built up, we went ahead and popped that ball in after starting the thread, and now we're just gonna get it nice and tight on there. Not all the way threaded down, but to a point where we can make sure it's even on both sides. The other thing that I do also want to mention is that there are going to be lines on the links themselves. That's gonna indicate your left-hand thread, and that will always point to the left side of the vehicle, which would be the driver's side here in the States. And I probably should have mentioned it a little bit earlier, because there are 2 different link ends. There's an offset one and a straight one, and you'll have to make sure that you identify those lines before threading it on there, or you could end up with the 2 links being on opposite sides for that line. Something, just like I was saying with the threading thing, you don't have to have them both on the left side. You could have them both on the right. You could have them both facing inside or both facing outside. Just remember that when you're actually going to adjust it on the car, you'll adjust them in 2 separate directions. Whereas if you have the line on the same side, it will thread the exact same way. You don't have to thread and re-thread to try and figure out which direction you need to go to either add or take away some of that camber. So we are just about finished up with that second link, just going back and making sure that the threads are just about even on both sides. Again, not worrying about the actual measurement just yet, because again, we can do that when it's actually mounted on the car, either on the table or taking a pair of calipers and just measuring to whatever the kit setup is. So now we can go ahead and actually mount them on the car, and you'll have an assortment of washers to work with here. At the hub side, you'll slide the link in between the two ears, and on your screw, you'll have screw, then the washer. You'll slide through the hub, through the camber link, through the front of the hub, and then you'll have your nut. Whereas on the inside at the actual tower itself, you're gonna have the screw that'll go through the tower. You'll put the washer on, and then you'll have I call it a cone washer or a countersunk washer. That countersinking will face towards the small washer you had, so it won't sit on the ball side, it'll sit on what would be the tower side, because if you have the countersunk facing the camber link ball, it'll actually sink it in a little bit and it might not sit perfectly evenly, so just something to look out for. And then what I'll go ahead and do is I'll get everything just kind of hand mounted onto the car itself. I'm not actually going through and doing a final tighten on anything just yet, just getting the nuts started. That way I can get all my hardware mounted on the car. This is gonna be a little bit more important, especially if you're using a drill, because if you let it go and hit the clutch, the car will start vibrating on the board, and then you might start throwing little bits around. So by doing it this way, you don't have anything moving around on the table. You can just go get it nice and tight, use the clutch if you so choose. On a brand new car, I like to be a little bit careful personally, but if you're a person that likes to just throw it all the way down there, give it a couple ugga-duggas per se, you could theoretically do that. So we're gonna go ahead, get all of our bolts tightened up here, get the final one on this right side of the vehicle, and there you have it. That is gonna be Bag F, the rear hub and camber link assembly. So now we effectively have a complete rear clip. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you in the next one.